Well, in 359, a man called Philip became king of Macedon. We know the Macedonians were fundamentally Greeks. That is to say, they were Greek speakers, and ethnically, if there is such a thing, they were Greek. But they were so far out of the mainstream of the development of the Greek polis that we have been examining this semester, that many, many Greeks, perhaps most of them, didn't think of them as being Greek. You know, when Greeks thought about what it was to be a Greek, they thought about more than the fact that they spoke the Greek language. They thought fundamentally, if you get to Aristotle, you see how thoroughly true this is, it had to do with a culture, a way of life. And that way of life was based upon the independent polis. Well, Macedon did not have such a structure. Macedon, the Greeks called the Macedonians an ethnos, a tribal group is what that sort of means. We use the word sort of nation somehow, but for the Greeks it had a different meaning. It was people who participated in the culture that they designated as Hellenic, and they thought the Macedonians fell outside of that. There were no polis in the Macedonian kingdom, and they thought of it as uncivilized in the technical sense. If you don't live in a polis, a city as they understood it, then you are not civilized. You are part of an ethnos, and that's the term they used of the tribal societies all around them. In a certain sense, if a Greek had looked at Macedonian society prior to Philip, he might have described it as Homeric. The Macedonians, on the other hand, claimed very proudly and powerfully and insistently that they were Greeks, they were Hellenes, and they probably invented a myth of their descent, indeed, not merely from Greeks, but from the real Greeks, that is to say, the Argives, who were the leading people in the time of Homer's poetry. And they claimed direct descent from Agamemnon and the other Argive kings. But now, who was there? Who was sitting in Thessaly, this great, big, new army? Is he going to be a menace to the Greeks in general? Philip, wherever he could, would install oligarchic governments in places that he ruled. He was not interested in democracy. He was not a friend of democracy. But at the time, people were divided. Some said, oh my heavens, this is a thoroughly aggressive man at the head of an army that looks incredibly strong, and he has terrific ambitions. What are we going to do? Against those who said, no, it's okay. He's okay now. He's happy. He doesn't want to do any more than that. Some people in society seeing a great danger out there that must be prepared for and confronted. Others thinking that that is overblown, that that is too pessimistic, that there is no such great danger, or that it can best be dealt with by negotiation and conversation and anything but fighting. And that was the situation in Athens. Our main source for complaint about this is Demosthenes, who much of the time is pleading with the Athenians to recognize the danger presented by Philip and for them to take the necessary steps to check Philip before it was too late. And he did not win those arguments very often. The first statement we have of Demosthenes, who will emerge as the dominant hawk for most of the time that he's doing business in Athens, is in 351 when he delivers the speech that we call the First Philippic. He delivered a series of speeches attacking Philip and warning the Athenians of the danger presented by Philip. To this day, Philippic is a word in English which means a strong attacking piece of rhetoric against some individual or some nation. He charged the Athenians with having created the great danger that they faced by making Philip into a great man through neglect, by their refusal to stop him when it was relatively easy to do so. They should send, he thought, a fleet, a good-sized fleet, to serve in the northern Aegean Sea and to stop Philip's expansion and to stop Philip, period. He urged them, and he will do this over and over again. Don't hire mercenaries, enlist for service yourself, vote a war tax, and those of you who should pay it should do so. He lost the argument. The Athenians did not take that action that he recommended. Philip, pretty soon after that, attacked the Olynthians. You remember Olynthus is an important state on the Chalcidic Peninsula. It has been a very significant state back in this century, you remember, when the Spartans went up there to defeat the Olynthians, so it constructed a league of their own. Well, they weren't out of business. So Philip went after them, and again, Demosthenes urges the Athenians to get involved and to prevent Philip from taking Olynthus and the Chalcidic states and gaining control of the northern Aegean Sea and all the danger that that presented to Athenian interests. He delivers 3 Olympiac speeches, which have the same character as the one I've described, but the Athenians do not do it. In the year 348, Olynthus falls. That city and the other cities of the region were destroyed. And you remember, this is not a typical way in which the Greeks dealt with defeated states, although heaven knows the Peloponnesian War had seen examples of it. But it was a very, very harsh kind of warfare that Philip carried forward. So that's what Philip did up there. Finally, after further fighting of one kind and another, the Athenians and a number of other Greeks make a treaty with Philip. It is called the Peace of Philocrates. He was one of the negotiators on the Athenian team. There really didn't seem to be much disagreement among the Athenians as to the desirability of this peace. Even Demosthenes, who was normally opposed to anything like it, felt that it probably had to be done. And I think that just reflected the realities of the distribution of power and also of the willingness of the Athenians to do anything more than that. And so there is this period of the Peace of Philocrates in which the Athenians make a defensive alliance with Philip. This time, the people who want to restore power to the priests invite Philip to lead the Greek forces in the sacred war. That is a very big deal. First of all, it recognizes the Macedonians as Greeks in the truest sense of the word. It should have been, probably was, a major source of satisfaction for Philip and extraordinary glory in the eyes of his fellow Macedonians that the Greeks should have done this. Not only accepted them as Hellenes, but asked them to save the oracle of Apollo, the center of Greek worship there. And he made himself president of the Pythian Games. You remember these Pan-Hellenic festivals. There were 4 great Pan-Hellenic festivals, Olympia, Nemea, the Isthmus of Corinth, and the one at Delphi, which was called the Pythian Games. And here is this barbarian from Macedonia, not only sitting on the council, but being the chairman, holding the position of honor as all the Greeks gathered for the Pythian Games. Demosthenes, from here on in, is determined and determinedly against Philip, spending all his energy and time trying to get up Athenian support and then indeed to put together a coalition of states besides Athens to resist and fight and defeat Philip. And indeed, he is more successful than he was before because the danger from Philip is obviously greater, so that more Athenians can see it that way. The league he puts together includes Euboea, Megara, Achaia, Acarnania, Leucas, Phocis, and finally Thebes. Now that's a pretty good trick. Phocis and Thebes are traditional opponents, but they're both in the league, and what that tells you is that those states, and especially those states which are in central Greece, closest to where Philip is located with his forces in Thessaly, and so they now see that there is a great danger from him, and they join in an anti-Philip coalition. Demosthenes tells the story. Now, Demosthenes is a witness who is excellent because he's a participant, contemporary, that's great. But you've got to look at him with a certain amount of skepticism because he's a participant. He's a guy who held a certain point of view. He was very active in politics. He has strong views on everything. His reputation depends upon how you look upon what he did, so that you must understand that when he tells us these things, he's telling it from his perspective. Secondly, to do something that was quite an achievement from a diplomatic point of view, to make an alliance with Thebes. Ever since the late 370s, Athens had not been allied to Thebes. It had become alarmed at Theban power and had joined even with Sparta against the Thebans. But here, as we're into the very late 340s, early 330s, he makes an alliance with Thebes, so that what is surely the strongest ground force on the side of the Greeks against Philip will be there, namely the Thebans, and the Boeotians in general. Finally, in 338, the Battle of Chaeronea takes place in western Boeotia. And the result is a victory for Philip. Philip won, and that was the end of Greek freedom. Thereafter, the states all had to bow down to Philip in terms of foreign policy. In many cases, he actually interfered in their internal autonomy. He established garrisons at key places in the Greek world, and they were called the fetters of Greece. It was like he put a great chain across Greece to show and demonstrate and make real his control. Athens was forced to abandon the confederacy, its own confederacy. They were forced to make an alliance with Philip. He constituted, in 336, the League of Corinth with himself as president. It was an offensive and defensive alliance. Philip was commander-in-chief, and he could tell everybody what to do, and they would have to do it. This truly was the end of Greek freedom. So that gets us to the interesting question of history's judgment on these events, and especially, I think, the interesting person is Demosthenes. But men like Churchill and Demosthenes know that those who love liberty must fight for it, even against odds, even when there is little support, even when victory seems impossible. In spite of the outcome, it seems to me that the stand of Athens and its Greek allies at Chaeronea may have been, in words that Churchill used in another context, their finest hour. Thank you very much.